And okay, we are live. I'm back here with Jeff, and we are taking on part two of If Women Counted by Marylin Waring. So Jeff's computer's acting up again, or the fan's a little loud, so bear with us. Jeff, take it away.
Okay, so if you guys recall from last time, her main point was that women's lived experience doesn't count in the economic realm. And she started off by asking us to consider who is productive, and she gave 4 examples, 2 women, 2 men. And in our world today, the 2 men's jobs are productive and the 2 women's jobs are not. The women's were doing household work, men were out. One was a pimp and one was waiting to blow up the world in a nuclear silo. That's the way the world counts value in our system today. And she labels, or she actually identifies the system as the United Nations System of National Accounts. It is it's a pretty fascist kind of system that privileges material war production in order to determine what is valuable and what is not. And she went through a history of it, so showing how we evolved over time. And as it turned out, the way it is today is pretty much an accident of history. It started because economists and statisticians were lazy, and they decided to count market values or market exchange because it was easier to count. And then finally it was adopted by, or the current system was started, I suppose, in a sense, by Nazi Germany, and adopted by everybody else who wanted to fight Nazi Germany, including the United States. It allowed them to pass a budget, a war budget, to get into the war, and they've kept it ever since. They've made small tweaks to it, but it's essentially a system of national accounts in which what is beneficial for war is privileged. So today we're going to be looking at some of the ways in which this is happening. One of the other things that she also stresses is that this is for the sake of men more often than not, because it's men who tend to hold the power. We're going to see ways that it's going to happen, or how she says that this happens, or this privileging happens today. So
now,
yes, go ahead.
Well, all right, go ahead. You go ahead first.
Okay. So I was going to say that 2 terms that are common in the world today is the notion of the firm and the notion of the household. So when we count things, the household is considered a consumption category, and firms are considered production categories. And this is the start of where she says the privileges start to take place. So for her, it's a very sexist starting point because it's in a sort of, okay, she starts off by giving this sort of feminist sarcastic comment that when a man marries his housekeeper, the GNP, or we call GDP now, goes down. Why? Because when she is a housekeeper, he pays her. But when he gets married to her, it's expected that she provides the same services for free. So what she's pointing out is that labor, the amount of work being done, has not shrunk, but the counting mechanism has made it look like it counts, or like it has gone down. Now, she asked us to consider, do you see anything wrong with this? This is, in fact, the system that we live in. And she would say that, yes, there is something wrong with this if marriage leads to a drop in GDP because work that was previously recognized as valid and valuable suddenly becomes not counted, as in literally not valued in our system. And that is the start of where she wants to say that this is a very patriarchal, sexist notion of the household being a consumption category as opposed to a production category. So if you're in a household and you hire somebody for your household, you're producing. But if that person becomes part of the family structure, the household, the value disappears in our system.
Right.
So he also claims that it's also neo-colonial. This system of United Nations System of National Accounts is neo-colonial in that it clearly imposes the values of industrialized countries on agrarian and subsistence societies. So, for example, we, for the most part, most people there is a certain statistical majority who may have a household that is really only consumption. But it's not the case in other less developed countries where the household is, in fact, the central part of production. I mean, in many subsistence countries, there is no firm to go to. The family takes care of themselves. So by forcing developing and undeveloped countries to accept the national system, the United Nations system of national accounts, you're forcing upon them a schema of thought of production and distribution that is Western oriented and clearly doesn't fit with subsistence or households that are, I don't even want to use the word household because, as she points out, it's very neo-colonialist, but households that are not households in the Western sense.
No, so wouldn't it be simpler to say that this is kind of like this, like she's talking about the colonialism of this. Wouldn't it be simpler to say that this is just kind of the natural consequence of a class project and imperialism?
Yes, I would say she would say that exactly. Yes. So yes, in fact, it's probably older than the system of national accounts, but the system of national accounts has ossified it, has made it the standard upon which everything is judged. And as we saw earlier, if you're looking for foreign aid or to distribute foreign aid or foreign investment into a country, you look at the national accounts. That's one way of doing it. How many households, how many people in households, how many, that kind of stuff. And by doing that, you're already skewing the policy, as we'll see actually later today.
So, but then if it's it comes from class, and imperialism is kind of a necessary component of capitalism, then it seems like the national system of accounts just kind of follows naturally that this would be the type of accounting that an imperialist nation would ultimately come up with anyway. This is kind of like the natural outgrowth of imperialist.
No, I think she would disagree with that. It happens to be in our system, and it happens to be that imperialism and the system went together. As she says, it doesn't have to go that way. Imperialism can take many forms. Imperialism was around long before this current system existed.
Well, colonialism was around for that long, but imperialism is a little more.
Empires have been around for a long time before the system too. In that sense, it's older than that, but they don't have to go together. And that's one of the things that we won't cover today, but we will cover the next time, is we have to be able to divorce from our minds elements of the system and what we consider as natural to the system. So she's not necessarily against capitalism. She's against the system.
Which is a problem.
Well, capitalism in and of itself is not necessarily a problem. It's only a problem if certain things get out of control. And one of the things that has gotten out of control is out of control, that misaligns control, is the United Nations system of national accounts. And we'll get to some examples of how it could be modified so that capitalism would be much more helpful. Because part of the problem that we have with capitalism in the modern world is that it's directed at war. Imagine if capitalism were directed rather than at war, at, say, education, or at justice, or at social welfare, or at public health.
So we would argue that that's a fantasy, that's impossible, that you can't have capitalism without imperialism at a certain stage.
Well, the type of imperialism that we've been accustomed to, it can't exist as long as we have the national system of accounts that we have now. If we change the policies within it and the subsequent adjacent policies that are attached to it, yes, it is it is incredibly possible, and that failure of imagination in the world today is the problem that holds us back. People can't imagine that they can be divorced, they can be changed, or that something that is bad right now can actually be good. So,
right, there definitely is a lack of imagination. Granted that.
So imagine that. Well, okay, capitalism for her, in moderate amounts, is a good thing. if it becomes excessive, it's poison. It's like many things in the world today. If you have too much of any vitamin, well, maybe not any vitamin, but say any mineral, it'll be poisonous. It's toxic. But if you have just the right amount, you're healthy. We're having this discussion at council: is fluoride? Should we put fluoride in the water supply? Some people say that, well, it's a poison. Well, yes, it is in excessive amounts. In fact, you can also die of oxygen poisoning too if you have only oxygen, right? So
let's not get into the fluoride debate.
Okay, that's not. But the point that she's trying to say is that capitalism in and of itself is not necessary. Should not be considered as good or evil. In fact,
Right, okay. That's where she's wrong. Actually, no, never mind. You're right. Never mind. You're right. It's not good or evil. I agree with you there.
it's what's being, it's what all the things that are attached to it right now, and its overwhelming power that it has. Reduce all that,
Okay, so
work for us.
So she thinks it's the direction that capitalism is in because of the national system of accounts is why capitalism is problematic now.
Yes.
I disagree, but let's move on.
Okay, so so those are the two things so far. Thirdly, she wants to talk about the notion of a primary producer. So this includes all the stereotypical male roles. And she's quoting from a UN primary source here, and the quote goes something like this: "In practice, no other imputations of this kind, that is, that are not supportive of neocolonialism, sexism, and patriarchy, are made since primary production and the consumption of their own produce by non-primary producers, that would be women, is of little or no importance." That's what she's saying. That the original document of the United Nations System of National Accounts says that people who are doing typically women's work are of little or no importance. The author claims that this statement embodies every aspect of the blindness of patriarchy, its arrogance, its lack of perception, and it literally enshrines the invisibility and enslavement of women in the economic process as of little or no importance.
Okay. See, we would argue that that's just part and parcel of the class system and of capitalism, not its own thing.
Sorry, but it's what?
That it's part and parcel of class societies and capitalism in particular, and that it's not a separate. Patriarchy isn't its own thing. It's just the natural outgrowth of a natural part of class society.
Uh-huh. So
you can't have a class society without patriarchy, basically.
I'm not sure if she would go that far. She doesn't get into.
I don't think she would agree either.
Okay. So she doesn't slam classes in the Marxian sense. She slams classes that are not based on reality. That is, classes that are created as a result of the system. So when she talks about primary producer as a class, it's been created by the system of national accounts. When she talks about women as a class, it's a part of the women as a class that have been created as part of the national accounts that she's against. The fact that there are men and women, and they can be considered as a class, I think she would say it is a fact. It's also a fact that one of those classes has a huge amount of privileges built into the system. That's where she has a problem. So we have these two classes, male and female. One of them has huge privileges. That's where she would see the problem with classes, not in their existential existence. In our world today, there are other kinds of classes that are legitimized or enhanced or supported by the system, and some that are disadvantaged and denied by the system. These classes exist. Insofar as they're created by the system, there's something wrong. If they existed even without the system, then they're an existential fact, and it's very difficult to distinguish between the two of them. But what she does want to do is change the system of national accounts for a more egalitarian system between all the classes. And in that sense, you can have a just, she believes that you can have a just system with different classes where one does not have privileges over the other.
Wait, what? We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here, aren't we?
Yes, we are actually. Sorry.
Okay. So we'll argue about that later.
Okay. Anyway, what the main point that she's been saying with this notion, these three notions, is that when you're designing a system to win and pay for a war, you're setting out predetermined outcomes. The policy is being informed by a theory, and the theory is designed to create a certain outcome. And that outcome happens to be the world we are in today. If you change the theory, or in this case, the actual legislation, the actual laws, the actual system of national accounts, you will, without a doubt, get a different result. You will get a different outcome. Now the question is, and she's going to say that you need a whole system change. You can tweak it and you get different outcomes. You can change it immensely and you can get radically different outcomes. So does that make sense so far?
Yeah, in her logic, yeah.
Her logic. Okay. So while these shortcomings she's talking about and these biases have been pointed out before, she says she's not original in identifying these things. But what she claims she's more original in is the reasons that outlining the reasons why professional economists have for not addressing these problems. And one of them, she claims, are conceptual problems. Men really do not understand the problem. This is an example of blindness and privilege, and she calls it patriarchy.
So even Marxist economists are blind to this. She's saying.
To the difference between male and female life experience, and men just don't get it.
So Keynes didn't see it, Hayek didn't see it, Friedman didn't see it.
That's right. Or if actually, she says that some of them may have seen it, but said it was of little or no importance. So I can see that women are different and they do things differently than men, but at the end of the day, it means nothing. They could dismiss it like that. So I shouldn't say that they didn't see it. They didn't consider it as serious or really a problem. I mean, it's like,
well, some Marxist economists have pointed out that women aren't counted in the system. They link it to capitalism more so than the system of accounts, the specific system of national accounts.
Yes, I think that's probably because they didn't understand the system of national accounts. So all the evils of capitalism, I think she would say, or I shouldn't say all of them, most of the evils of capitalism arise as a result of the system of national accounts privileging certain things, and in particular, material war production. So those were the conceptual problems. It wasn't viewed as seriously. And even maybe the Marxists who did it pointed out, said, what can we do about it? There were these so-called practical problems. Men could not seem to figure out how to get the needed data. The result has been that attempts and quote-unquote successes at trying to overcome the intrinsic shortcomings and biases are always ill-defined and biased towards market activity. Again, because market activity is very easy to count. Monetary transactions are easy to count. How do you measure the love that a mother gives her child as she raises him at home? That's part of the problem. Well, you don't in this world, right? But she's suggesting that that's a real value, and it's a lot higher value than pretty much most things that men do. We're trying to blow up the world.
Yes, we're good at that.
Yes. So these are the practical problems that she says we just can't figure it out, or men can't seem to figure it out. It's commonly believed by economists and policymakers that the inclusion of non-market activities based on questionable imputations greatly reduces the usefulness of national accounts as a tool for economic analysis. This is a quote, I just quoted from her. And what she's basically saying is that if we're going to just put in a fudge factor because we can't value, what's the value of raising a child well by by a mother raising her child well? Well, we don't know. We shouldn't be putting a dollar value into that. So what we do, it's effectively zero. And if we were to put in some value to it, well, then that will skew everything. Because, I mean, if you don't raise the next generation, everything's lost. So essentially, if we were to follow the current value of actually valuing things for how much they can produce later, motherhood should be actually the highest value, and that would really boost the economy.
So you're saying we should, or she's saying we should examine things based on their use value, maybe?
We can.
Other
Okay.
than their exchange value?
We can, and there's also image value, but we can if we wish
Image
to.
value?
Yeah, that's the next level beyond Marxism. So Marxists are contending that exchange value was overpowering use value, and nowadays most postmodernists would say that even image value is overcompensating for exchange value. The point is that what she's saying is this would be the.
Sorry, go ahead.
All she's basically saying is that we're still in the same system. If we suddenly say that, based on the system's way that we look at it, and we look at it more rationally, we say that motherhood is actually worth like $6 million a year for the first 18 years of a child's life. That would skew the economic system so much that it would break, but it might even be closer to the reality. She's saying that the system won't accept it because it's not designed for that kind of valuation. It's designed to create material war production.
Right.
Right. So,
in a democratized economy where women had equal say in what gets produced and what has value, then wouldn't that kind of solve the problem anyway? Because automatically you'd have women's work and
when women have the same say as men, it makes no difference if we're stuck in a system that was created back in 1945, 42, or 43. So this system is not something that gets changed easily. I mean, you get tweaks to it from time to time, but give women all the power today, unless they're willing to change and identify this system of national accounts, it's not going to make a difference. The system of national accounts creates the world that we live in today.
So then she would argue that attempts at socialism in the 20th century were partially co-opted or ruined by the system of national accounts?
Precisely. After the war, it would have been impossible for communism to survive, and
because of the system of national accounts.
Yes. So she also points out that the Soviets, or the Second World, before the fall of the Second World, they had their own system of national accounts, and it was very similar, in fact, to ours. They had a few different privileges. It was material production. They call it the materialist production system, and they loved war production just as much as we did. They loved super mega projects, probably more than we did, and that's why they have that old joke like, what's two stories tall, takes like 60 gallons of fuel every half hour, and cuts oranges into thirds. And the answer apparently was a Soviet machine designed to cut oranges into quarters. In other words, it didn't work, but it was a huge use of resources to do something. That was their system, and it wasn't any better than ours. But it did allow them to have military production that dwarfed ours. They had more bombs, they had more planes, they had more weapons, and they had them better in some cases than us because they were first into space. They circled the moon first, right? Their tanks, in some cases, were better than ours in the Second World War, right?
But if this system privileges capital and capitalist countries and the ruling class of these capitalist countries who have all the power,
yes,
how could you ever hope to change this system without successful socialist revolutions that got rid of these power structures, this class system?
She doesn't really answer that. We may need a revolution. Towards the end, we will see that. She gives.
All right, we'll leave it for the end then.
Okay. So, where were we here? Yeah, so practical problems and conceptual problems. And if we can't seem to overcome them because it's hard to conceive of a world that's different from what we have now. It's so ingrained in pretty much everything that is done and in every law and in every policy that's already there. And it's a self-referential circle. So, yeah, in a sense, you do need a revolution to change that. But here's a cute little quote she gave us. Let's be clear, the conceptual difficulties and problems of data collection arose because too many women did too much work. Okay? She is saying that the value of women's work is so great that it dwarfs everything that men do. And if we were to count it, even within the system that we have now, men's work would be a small portion of all the work that's being done.
So, a commenter here said, I'd say once we start paying mothers their appropriate value for what they give to society, we will have achieved full socialism.
I think she would
which
say
I disagree with.
You'd get a lot closer to it than we are now, but I don't think she would say that it would be full socialism. It would certainly be a step in the right direction, but whatever value you put on that, because in our world, the value you're putting on motherhood is based on a system that already privileges material war production.
So, I think in order to get to what the commenter said, in order to get to a society where mothers are paid their appropriate value, you would necessarily have to get rid of the system of national accounts. I think you can't have one without the other.
Well, you can't. Yes and no. So, a system of national accounts needs to exist if you're going to have a country. I mean, there's been various kinds of them around since antiquity. The one we have now is just the latest in a long line of them. It needs to be replaced by something else, or you just don't have an economy. I mean, it would be.
So we need to reform it.
You need to either reform it or start anew, but you would need something.
She sounds like the SPD in the 20s who gave the country to Hitler.
Okay.
Reformists.
So, in the last two chapters, the first one will talk about ameliorations to the system that we have now, which she says will make the world better, but it won't solve the problem. In the last chapter, we'll talk about how to actually solve the problem.
Okay.
All right. So, the system as it stands now makes women and women's work invisible. It's not counted. It's there, but you don't see it. You don't consider it important because, again, it's not counted. Like, how much are you paying for motherhood? Nothing. Well, I guess it's not worth that much.
Right.
It has that it's self-referential look at it, and she'll give an example of that when she was fighting in New Zealand for daycare. So she believes that this invisibility, though, is quite tragic. But it's important and it's consequential because the biased numbers that come out of national account statistics are used for determining the amount of and direction of investment and of foreign aid. And if these women are invisible, it's not going to go to them, right? So if it's not going to go to them, it's only going to go more to the men because they're the head of the household in most countries. Women are still doing the work, but men are getting paid for it. And this is also important and consequential because it hides the true nature and extent of real productive labor, which is useful for life, which is what women do. And in most farming and agrarian societies, men as the household get the credit and or the loans, but women do the work.
But then,
yes.
But then I'd argue that that labor necessarily kind of needs to be underpaid or undervalued in order for the reproduction of the proletariat of capitalist relations. If you did pay women what they're worth, the whole system would necessarily not function.
Yes, she would say that too. But the system would not function because the counting mechanism of that system is flawed. So the economy, in a sense, would be transformed, perhaps even collapse, but labor would still go on. People would still continue to work.
The capital still wouldn't be able to make enough profit.
That would probably be the case. It would be a major redistribution, and it might even be an amelioration, but it wouldn't solve the problem. Also, if these classes are, these women, and in particular women, are invisible, then we can also ignore their working conditions and their exploitation of these invisible classes, which is part of what Marxist was always talking about, right? And and also consider that if you're a developing country and don't count women's work, you're more needy, and that's a way to get more money.
If you don't count women's work?
Yeah. I mean, in a sense, where the capitalist world, the developed world, is asking underdeveloped countries not to count them because they're forcing upon them this United Nations System of National Accounts in order to get any money. So it's got that colonial shift, and this is how things are done. You better adapt.
Right. There's a lot of things we kind of force on them in order to play ball.
Yes, exactly. And that playing ball makes them more like us when they may not even be ready for it. So she gives one. Here's an example she gives of how the policy and the blindness leads to what we would look at today as ridiculous results, but very logical results. So how logic leads to ridiculousness. So the author gives an example from her experience as a parliamentarian, in which it was impossible, literally impossible, to argue the need for childcare facilities because the system of national accounts in New Zealand in the 1970s classified most women outside of the labor market as, quote unquote, non-producers who are economically, quote, inactive and unoccupied, unquote. So these inactive, unoccupied non-producers have time to do what they want and don't need anything. And if they do need anything, then they should go get a job.
Right.
The logic of that. They're inactive, they're unoccupied. Why should we give them money? Let them get a job. But what they're actually doing is raising a family, feeding their husbands and their children, and cleaning the house, and basically reproducing society.
Social reproduction.
Yes, but that was not counted. It was not even imagined because it was labeled inactive and unoccupied in the system of national accounts of New Zealand in the 1970s, and probably pretty much around the world. This is why it needs to change. So what? But like I said, why there's, in a sense, evil and patriarchy in the worst sense of the words. Slavery. Women have, in a sense, been enslaved. And so if you accept the premises and the categories of the system, then the outcome is assured. As women are inactive and unoccupied. You want to destroy the system? You got to accept it, or you accept it. If you accept it, then they don't need childcare because they can do whatever they want. They're free.
Yeah.
So that kind of twisted logic may be logical, but it's ridiculous because of the blindness that ideally you and I, and anybody who's listening to this, might see as a problem. But if you don't see that, then the logic makes perfect sense. So policy direction is determined by the theory. The theory is reinforced by the policy and the outcome of the policy that gets sponsored. And so you have this self-referential system over time that just builds up the strength of the system. So from her perspective, policymakers, economists, and statisticians appear to be in the worst case in a conspiracy to keep women's work uncounted, or in best case, just blind to the fact that they are keeping women's work uncounted. So she points out, policymakers work with and decide from models and data of the economists and statisticians. Economists claim to work within policy guidelines and the data required for those guidelines, and the statisticians claim to produce the data that policymakers and economists demand. So it's just like a self-referential circle where they're feeding each other, right?
Well, it's like they don't have any. that's the thing about capitalism is they don't have any other option. Even if they wanted to or they noticed, there's no way, like, you can't actually make the decision you want to make in that
Yeah,
system.
and that's because of the system of national accounts that privileges certain things and theories, material war production, to be precise, over everything else. And so you get these predetermined things, predetermined self-reinforcing circles of thought, action, and consequences.
Okay, well, I mean, what would she say to, let's say, the social democratic countries of Scandinavia who seemingly are not, I mean, they're using the system of national accounts, but they're not privileging war production. They're not privileging, armies.
I think she would say they are. It just doesn't look that way. So even Canada is. So in the very accounting of the system, in in the very laws of, say, the banking system or the labor laws, they're designed in a sense so that you can change into a war footing very
Right.
quickly.
Okay, I see. Yeah. So even though they're social democratic now, on a dime, they with the system of national accounts, they could go into full war production mode.
Yes.
Okay.
What's actually being counted right now is the capacity to do that.
The capacity for war.
Yes. So the GDP is a measure of how much motivation and tools are in the economy that could be repurposed.
Right. For war, if
Yes.
needed.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, that's what happens when you're in a system of that essentially reinforces a particular way of thinking about things. It is, though, she points out, sometimes countered by men that they also provide unpaid work. So it's like, it's fair. Women get unpaid work, and so do men. However, in every case, there is an opportunity to do the work on the market and get paid a high price. That's for men. But if women have a market for their unpaid work, there is almost always a low paid. They're almost always at a low paid level. The amount of male unpaid work is tiny compared to women's share of unpaid work. So, if you use an example, if a man wishes, he can fix his own car. Right? This is rare, unpaid work. Right? Most men don't spend their time fixing their cars, right? If he wishes, he could get a job fixing a car. So if you're a mechanic, say at Hyundai or Rolls-Royce or any car company, it's a pretty high-paying professional job, right? This is how it is for men. If a woman wishes, she can clean her own house. And in fact, women do this a lot. It's very common, and it's unpaid work. If she wishes, she could get a job cleaning other people's homes. If she does, this is a low-paying, a low-wage job. So you see how, from this example, when men want to do something for free, it's rare, unpaid, and if they really want to do it, they can in the marketplace, and they will do it. They will get highly paid. Women, on the other hand, are the exact opposite. They tend to do a lot of unpaid work, and if they want to do it out in the marketplace, it's always low paid.
Yeah. Well, the market would just say, "Oh, that's because it's unskilled work." But I mean, a better example might be, uh, what are they called? Doulas, like women who um, kind of help rear young children or help with uh, births.
So wet nurses and midwives.
Yeah, stuff like that, and I mean even just raising babies in general. I mean, like before class society, and even during some older class societies, people lived in communities where all the women would help raise the
Mm-hmm.
child, not just the one. Um, and so that's the type of work that men are actually not good at and couldn't easily do the same stuff.
Well, it's funny you should say that. She actually does bring that up. So those circles where women would breastfeed each other's kids whenever they had to do something, men, in a sense, have taken it over with baby formula. Midwifery is on the verge of being extinct because it's illegal. You have to go to a hospital where usually male doctors, I mean, it's changing now, but certainly when she was writing this, there was a lot more male doctors and would do the work instead of a midwife. So times are changing now. I'll grant you that compared to 1986 when she wrote this, but the trend is still there. What women do is devalued. What men do is increasingly valued.
Yes, but so we would argue I would argue that's purely because of capital and capitalism, and would exist regardless of the system of national accounts.
Okay, now she doesn't really. I think she would disagree with that, but I do know that Camille Paglia, who we studied a little while ago, believed that this was a 7,000-year trend since the beginning of civilization, where men have been, because of their fear of women, fear of death, and that kind of stuff, have been taking away women's power like that, and it culminated in Christianity. But
Camille is actually much closer. I think she's very close to it because like production and progress necessitated the subjugation of women into their roles. And then it's that the patriarchy is just a necessary part of class society. And,
yes. So you should say that Paglia would be the opposite of Waring here. So Waring sees that women have been enslaved and beholden to men's power, whereas Paglia would say that that's much natural. It's always been like that.
Yes.
So they're coming from two different perspectives, opposite perspectives. They're coming to the same conclusion that women are in fact, exploited by men.
Well, yes, but exploited by the class system.
Yeah. Well, no, I wouldn't say it's that. Well, in the sense that there's male and female as a class, yes, but not necessarily the rich and the poor, because there's revolutions all the time. But this movement away from women's power to men's power, from belly magic to head magic, was 7,000 years in the making.
Yeah, Paglia's version is interesting.
it's quite interesting. Anyway, so at the end of this section, we'll do another one today. Men are paid to reproduce social relationships or to reproduce patriarchy, but women are not, and they're paid pretty well to do that. So that was part 3. We're going to do part 4 now. The notion of a household is a primary problem because it is conceived in a Western and male-centric way. The author describes how some effort was expended to categorize and give value to women's work in developing nations, but which was to be phased out as these nations developed, that is, became more Western. So there's total neocolonialism there. That is, that these nations became more Western. So in the Western world, the household is deemed as a consumption category, as mentioned before, and the firm is a production category. Households and subsistence economies need to produce to survive, but development is supposed to change that so they become consumption machines only. Thus, the neo-colonizing effect of economic theory is to disempower women in developing countries. So that's the neocolonial aspect of the household. And the notion of household is also male-centric because it assumes the patriarchal notion that a male is the head of a household and the primary breadwinner in a quote-unquote traditional nuclear family. Yet, this model is rare in developing countries. A married man and woman with kids is now the largest minority of family types, and this she claimed in 1986, so it's probably even greater now. And it's almost non-existent in developing countries.
Right.
The family unit is much larger, often including 3 generations plus aunts and uncles and cousins.
Well, right, because this model, this nuclear family, is the model that's most helpful to capitalism, to reproducing capitalism, to keeping everybody atomized from each other. Because as soon as you have a strong community bonds, then it's hard to impose, kick people off the land and make them work for a capitalist rather than subsistence farming or whatever.
Yes, I think she would agree with that. And it's coincidentally, right after the Second World War that the nuclear family started taking off.
Right.
Which is
One question here before
yes.
we keep going on screen here. Moxie asks, so how could a world when motherhood was valued exist within capitalism?
That will be the next section. We will talk about
Okay.
next time.
All right, next time, Moxie. Stay tuned.
So, shoehorning societies into Western ideal categories is done through the census, according to her. In the census, the questions are designed to make men the center and make women invisible to, or at most, the periphery of household activities. The census, in all countries, in 1986 at least, was and continues to be designed mostly by men using tools developed by men for policymakers who are mostly men. Okay.
Has she read Foucault?
I suspect that Foucault did most of his writing about the same time she was, so it's hard to say.
They're kind of talking about similar things here. Doesn't Foucault talk about how school and the state really exist for military production?
Yes, he does. I can't say if she's read him or not. They were contemporaries, or at least she wrote this at the height of his popularity as well. So
all right, so they're on the same kind of track here in their conception of the state, I guess.
Yes, I think so. So from her perspective, the first major problem with a census is that it focuses on households with men as the head. The author believes that a census focused on individuals would be an amelioration or an improvement. Okay. A second major problem with the census is that it focuses on paid work. So again, remember back in 1911, the system of national counts at the time decided to only count monetary transactions. Therefore, paid work is the only thing that it counts. The census, for her, to make it better, would be it must recognize unpaid work as legitimate, productive, and consumptive labor, because quite often it is a work that makes paid work possible and viable. So voluntary work needs also to be recognized as being as important as paid work in reaching a realistic measure of economic and social activity in society. This is especially true in small businesses and farms, where the proprietors often put in huge amounts of free but necessary labor, yet the profit is only counted towards the man as the head of the household's income. She also claims that it's the tax code. The tax code in many countries also discriminates against women. The overwhelmingly male financial donation to charities are claimed as tax deductions. The overwhelmingly female capital donations of time, skill, and labor are not tax deductible. That's just one example. So you as the head of the household can donate a ton of money to charity and get a benefit in taxes. You as the subordinate member of the family, the woman, you can donate your time to a good cause, and that's not tax deductible. Because, of course, you donated your time, right?
Right.
So there are many conceptual problems with the United Nations System of National Counts. And the author identifies several problems that are not generally acknowledged by the profession, which any honest person should have issues with. So consider one. First, when unpaid work becomes monetized, that is counted, then there appears to be growth, but no real change in people's lives.
Right.
So if you create a new market for something that people were doing for free before, congratulations, you've increased the GDP of the country, but the work has not changed.
Right. So all of a sudden, if you decided to count video gaming as production or monetize it somehow, then that is a boost to the economy.
Yes. But playing it for free is not. And
yeah, but nothing's actually changed. Nothing's fundamentally changed. You're just counting differently.
So she's going to hint at surrogate motherhood. What she's doing here is like, if a woman wants to have a child, she doesn't get paid for that. It's part of the natural economy. But hey, if we can set up a baby farm and pay women to have kids, hey, we're boosting the GDP. That's economic growth. And kids are still being born.
Right.
So that's unpaid work becomes monetized. So 2, if GDP per capita falls, this is generally considered a drop in welfare. But interestingly, it's not if the population is rising. It's only the quality of life. You see? So GDP per capita can change. If you have a high birth rate, GDP per capita will tend to fall, or not rise as fast, perhaps. And if you have a plague and you wipe out half the population, suddenly GDP per capita might go up as people inherit stuff that was left over, right? But there's really no real link to that, you see? Anyway, number 3, when comparing countries, the system uses the exchange rates to calculate relative purchasing power. Okay, so how many Big Macs can you buy on the dollar on a 1 hour's worth of salary in Canada versus the United States versus Zimbabwe or versus Indonesia, right? A sharp devaluation, and then she points out that a sharp devaluation of a currency does not really mean that everyone in the country has just lost a comparable amount of wealth or standard of living. So Argentina devalued its currency, I think, 5 times in the 20th century. Did they suddenly lose, I think in one case it was like an 80% drop in value of the currency. Did they suddenly lose 80% of their wealth and standard of living? No, they did not. That is how the system is just doesn't look at reality in any way that's useful. She goes on to
no, it's a construct. It's an
yeah,
the social construction.
Yeah, she goes on to comment to talk about a common statistic people say, like, people in some country in Africa, they make $2 a day. So do people who live on $2 a day really have a $2 a day budget? And is this comparable to a middle class income and budget? No. The imputations of cost are fundamentally incompatible across currencies, nations, and people. So, but we like to make these comparisons as if they were somehow, valuable, and they're not. She's pointing out.
Yeah, that's a really good point. $2 for, or like $50 to Somalian is completely different than $50 to, you or me.
Yeah. So, and a corollary of this is that human sentiments of needs and wants is incomparable between even individuals in the first world or neighbors. And so imputation categories such as rent, leisure, net worth, family size, etc. are all fundamentally incompatible, and thus their use is imperialistic and inaccurate. So I have 2 kids. Do you have any kids?
No.
No. Well, you're so poor. I've got 2, you've got none. Right?
Right.
That's nonsense, right? Yeah, I mean, your particular values are different, and your life, you're at a different stage in life. They're not compatible. To say things like that, it's just crazy. And she says we do it all the time. Then she goes on to talk about 3 areas of difficulty with the United Nations System of National Accounts that are generally accepted by the economic and statistical professions. And she puts difficulty in quotes because, from her perspective, they call it difficulty, but she says these things are like deal breakers. It really should be deal breakers. So consider the hidden economy. It's usually considered to be made up of 2 components. The subsistence economy, that is anything that is produced without a market component. For example, in some countries, very young children work in fields along with their parents, doing all sorts of useful things to help the family subsist. And 2, the black market. That is all uncounted market activity from babysitting to prostitution. And I guess prostitution is considered, when she wrote this, it was illegal in most countries. From drug ops and smuggling to graft, forms of tax evasion and gifts. All of this stuff is, in a sense, a black market. And economists agree that the bigger the hidden economy relative to the measured economy, the less accurate and useful would be the figures of the national accounts.
Yeah.
So they admit that, but then they are blinded by the fact that women do so much work as gifts, as free labor, like babysitting,
Right.
prostitution to their husbands, right? All of that
Right.
is not counted. And if we were to count it, economists agree that it would be less useful for the national accounts.
Now, wouldn't it be possible? Couldn't it be counted technically, but
Yes.
not not remunerated? Said that wrong.
Yeah, remunerated or yeah.
Remunerated, yeah.
Well, let's imagine what's that like. So we have to go to, let's consider the typical marriage. And she does this, actually. This is quite funny when she says this. How often times does a man get sex in his marriage? We have to compare that number with how many times if he had gone to a prostitute and consider what he did with his wife and its value on the open market.
Yeah.
Yeah. You see some ridiculousness there?
Yeah, that seems like a tough one to square that circle.
Yeah. So, yeah, imagine if you really wanted to make your wife work, you say that, Joe, man, she's been busy all night, right? Really? That's
Yeah.
So these are part of the conceptual and problematic difficulties of doing that in the system that we have now. But she's going to offer a different solution in the end. But that's part of the problem that we have now, is that we're only counting market transactions and comparing non-market transactions to market transactions. And she says that's a lost cause. It really is. I mean, if you're going to try and figure out how much your man's wife is worth, you're going to be comparing her to a whole set of things for everything that she does in the household. And really, how much time does she spend babysitting versus cooking the food? What if she was multitasking? Right? The system that we have now is not fit to actually count that. So somebody had asked, like, what happens if we pay women what they're really worth? That is a calculation problem that is literally humongous. And she disagrees with it on a fundamental level. One of the things we said last time was that everybody is productive every moment of every day. The question is, productive for what? If I happen to be your employer, the only concern I have is if you are productive for me. And so, and if you're a parent, I've seen this with myself and with my parents towards me, is like, if I'm watching television, they look at me as being unproductive. I look at my kids, if they're watching too much TV, I'm thinking of them as being unproductive. But what are you really doing? You're providing an audience for those actors on television or those cartoon animators to provide a service. So you're being very productive. It's just not for what I think is valuable. And that is part of the fundamental problem in the world today, and that the system of national accounts does. It says you are productive if you do this, and you're unproductive if you do that. And what you are, and what's counted as productive, is something that's helpful for war production or for moving in that direction should a war ever arise.
So
if
let's say we revamp the system of national accounts, and we count women's work. It's on the ledger. It's counted somehow with some calculation, some algorithm, whatever. How does the woman still has to get paid somehow for it to make a difference?
Yeah. So I'll give you a hint of where we're going here. If everybody is 100% productive every moment of every day, doing something, say you're consuming bed sheets and mattresses by sleeping on them, everybody should get paid pretty much the same.
So she's suggesting a UBI.
Yes, a universal basic income.
Right, but with people still working on top of, like, people still go to a job and work for a capitalist, a business owner.
Well, we'll get into those details in next time.
Okay, next time.
Where we're going at. So, but one of the premises that she starts is that we are in fact productive all the time. We just may not be productive for what somebody else thinks we should be doing at that moment. So if you're listening,
sorry, go ahead.
If you're listening to music while you're at work and watching YouTube videos and cat videos, you're supporting those YouTube video producers. You're not doing anything productive for the company that you're supposed to be working for. And it's in that small distinction that there is hope for everybody, because it doesn't matter if you're a CEO or bum on the street watching television all day, you are both equally productive in different things. The CEO for running a company, the bum for watching television or sleeping, whatever it takes. Those fine distinctions that we make as to this is more helpful for war and less helpful for war, which is equivalent to saying this is paid more and this is paid less, is the nuance that needs to be changed.
Yeah.
To get to a hint to where we're going, imagine if instead of war, everybody was paid more or less according to how well they contributed to education. Or to
that would be great, but I'm saying that's only possible under socialism, because under capitalism you end up with crises of over accumulation, falling rates of profit, and therefore you have to destroy some of that capital with war in order to rebuild it.
That's what our current system, in fact, necessitates, and we're going to get into that shortly. But it doesn't have to be that way because, as a hint to where we're going, there's a physical space limit to material production, but there is no space limit to immaterial production.
Yes.
Which is a hint to where we can get unlimited growth without the problems that come with material production. But that's coming up later.
Right. You mentioned this in the Jane's what's her name? Jane Jacobs. Yeah, with her economic vision. I asked you about that.
Yes.
Immaterial production.
You still got my book on that too, right?
Yeah, I've been meaning to give it back to you for forever. Yeah.
Yes. You'll probably be able to keep it forever, considering this social distancing will last pretty much for the rest of our lives.
All right. Well, where are we now?
Where were we? Yes. So economists agree that the bigger the hidden economy, the worse it is for the real quote unquote counted economy. And so she points out that how large is this hidden economy, and she says that it's huge compared to the actual counted economy. When we talk, we have like a $4 trillion economy. She's saying that is just what we count. There is so much more by multiples of that in the real world.
Right, but that's all that's useful to capitalists.
Yes, not only to capitalists, but again, the war machine is what's really at stake here. The capitalists, you would have, I think she would say that you would have capitalists no matter what the end goal of the national accounts are. It would just be capitalists in something else, maybe in education, in social justice, in justice, in exploration, in like Star Trek World or something like that. You'd still have that. But the difference would be that if you choose an immaterial goal, you can accumulate forever. Whereas if you choose a war production goal, you basically have to use that at some point by destroying half the world.
All right, I got a book for you after this.
Okay. And another problem that she has is with the costing of pollution. And we touched on this last time. It has never been solved correctly. Currently, costs from pollution are added to the national accounts, whereas they should be subtracted.
Yes.
So this includes the cost of remediation, treatment, and reductions of pollution, and the despoilment of the environment. Accounting logic would suggest that economic costs should be subtracted from economic benefits to get an accurate bottom line, but not in our world. That's not what we do. The only thing that's allowed to be subtracted from the national accounts is depreciation on the stock of capital goods. This is a literal accounting. These are accounting laws of the 1980s or 1986 or so when she wrote this. The only thing that the national accounts, and this includes business accounting, standard national accounting in general, the only thing that can be discounted, like besides losses, of course, like monetary losses, like you put in and you get back, is the depreciation of the stock of capital goods. But environmental cleanup after a war or a disaster is said to be a societal preference. So we don't like this bombshell in our yard, so we're going to clean it up. That's your preference, is what it's viewed as. And therefore, you're adding to the national accounts or to the GDP, as opposed to saying, there's something bad there that I want to get rid of.
Right. It's a market choice or a.
Yes, and making it a market choice, you add it to the national accounts, or sorry, to the GDP, as opposed to considering it a bad. It becomes a good. So an unexploded bomb in your backyard becomes a good that needs to be dealt with in a market system. You get higher bomb clearers or whatever, mine sweepers or whatever, and you pay them. And this becomes a bonus. But the fact that it was there, it should have been more precisely labeled as a bad. So yeah, it's a societal preference, and the market is merely responding to consumer wants. Here's your quote: "If our actual wants are for clean air, fresh water, and standing forests, we cannot possibly express such desires, for they cannot be expressed in the market." While the market may have a place in society, it is very ill-suited to identify and value non-market values, which are usually all the higher order values. So national income provides for deficits in money, but not deficits in natural resources, or deficits in human character that perpetuate such destruction. Right? So
Deficits in human character are what perpetuate this destruction?
even she can see that there was a lot of psychos that would tend to make a C to CEO, to the CEO or president level of a corporation. Right?
That's kind of blaming. She sounds like she's putting the blame on humans rather than our system.
Well, it's the system, and it is humans as well. But the system makes the humans in many cases.
Well, yes, I agree.
But again, she does say that the market has a valid place in society. It's just not as much as it should be here. Meanwhile, growth releases its literal poisons into the world. Pollution affects us all, and all more and more. Of our resources will be devoted to cleaning up or protecting goods and services because it's an expression of our preferences and wants. The possibility that most of us would prefer not to have to be forced to spend on these goods and services is unthinkable by most. And if thinkable, then what to do is unimaginable. Imagine, like, somebody drops a bomb on your backyard. You sort of have to clean it up. You don't really want to because you don't want it to have been there in the first place.
Yeah.
But by doing this, you're still supporting the economy and getting people to work.
Right, you're adding to those numbers.
Yes, you're adding to those numbers by creating a bad. And that's in fact what happens when you have a system of national accounts that's dedicated to war production. So the fact that we are forced to spend to protect our environment is an indication that we are not as free as we think. The fact that our slavery is expressed as our preference is an indication of the presence of widely accepted propaganda. And here's your final quote for this session, or well, not for this session in her book. The reason that the measurement of free time was a problem for men was because they had free time. In the average day of the average unpaid woman, there is seldom free time during which no productive activity takes place. She's saying that the lived experience of such women is that they work for their man.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
But male free time is also really only a new phenomenon. I mean, it's always been a phenomenon. Free time has always existed for the upper class, whether it's been slaveholders or feudal lords or capitalists, but less so for capitalists almost. But for the working class, free time has only existed. That's also a pretty new concept.
Mm-hmm. But it came first for men, not so much for women, because even when women went to the factories, they still had to come back and serve their man. Housework was still, and even predominantly today, is still done mostly by women. So,
yeah.
Two major points coming up still that she wants to talk about. So, The policy propaganda of national incomes accounting generates a belief that many economic problems, unemployment, underutilization of capital, lack of growth, are susceptible to improvement through military spending. Ever notice that? I think it's still pretty much true. If you want to get rid of a recession, go to war. So, how many times have you heard the theory that World War II was the event that ended the Great Depression? Like they spent, like essentially to get out of a depression, you got to do a lot of spending. And
Yes.
World War II, it was a lot of spending that pretty much ended the Great Depression. Ever heard that theory before?
Well, yeah. I mean, they destroyed all the capital and then and put it back to work.
Well, they put it first to work because they had to build up their armed forces, right? And then they destroyed it, and then they put it back to work.
Yeah.
But essentially what it meant was you got to spend, and in this case, war, to get out of a depression. She's arguing that it's this. So she's Keynesian in this sense, and actually Milton Friedman would agree, I think, on this part that in an economic downturn, you don't shut the spigot; you actually spend more. James talked about burying banknotes in old abandoned mine shafts, and Milton Friedman talked about how the Great Depression was caused because the Federal Reserve in the United States shrank the money supply when it should have done the exact opposite. It killed off liquidity. So it's funny how the right and the left agree on this. But our system of national accounts says that in order to spend more, you got to go to war because that's what it's all for. So the way to get out of an economy and economic trouble, even today, is useful through war.
Yeah, I can't argue there. That's right now is the perfect example of what we're talking about. With I mean, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but the far right in the United States in particular, and it's kind of bleeding out to Canada, is really pushing this China conspiracy theory about coronavirus, and it was made in their lab on purpose, and that they're gaming the system, and they're really pushing this kind of evil empire narrative that they control the World Health Organization and all this nonsense. So it's the same neocons who pushed the weapons of mass destruction meme in 2003 and 2. So they're gearing up the war economy because there's a crisis of overaccumulation, and capital is having a lot of trouble right now, especially with this coronavirus. So it's almost even more important to make this war happen.
Yes, and from the perspective of the system of national accounts, it's absolutely true. We have too much material production, and it needs to be gotten rid of. And how do you get rid of it? On something. So, however, war and destruction ought to be considered as not profitable because capital stock is not improved. Lives are lost and futures are destroyed or mortgaged. So you'd think that it's not exactly the best way to order the world, and that's what we have right now. The economic position of war is still measured in terms of profit, production, capital, and manpower. Nowhere is an account for death, poverty, homelessness, refugee populations, ruined food sources, the enormous waste of investment in armaments, and in the increasingly fragile exploitation of the environment count. So what we're going with this is it's important to be able to kill people. It's not so important whether they're poor or rich, whether they're housed or not housed, whether they're refugees or not. But the important thing is that we can kill them. That's the system that we live in today. And that's why they're talking that way. So,
right.
There's the hint of the solution again. Material and immaterial wealth is cumulative, right? The capital accumulation you talked about, right? But she wants to distinguish it between material and immaterial. The world we live in is geared towards material production, and there's space limitations to that. There's only so many bridges that can be built. There's only so many bombs that can be built, and planes and cars. And if you got cars, you can only put so many of them downtown before there's no more room for them, right? But immaterial wealth, that, there's no space requirement. It's limitless in that sense.
So,
Mhm.
so I mean, yeah, it's true, but at the basis of our system, of our current system mode of production, it still requires infinite exploitation of land and labor.
No, not necessarily. So,
Well,
uh,
the soil erosion, the pollution, all that stuff
so
is
yes, we will always need to have a material production, but what we don't have to have is an unlimited material production. That's not necessary. A certain amount of material production is necessary for survival, for a good life, for a comfortable life. But beyond that, it's wasteful and dangerous, and it's destroying the world. And that's why you have these part of these crises where you have to have a war in order to, get rid of some of the surplus material wealth that you've created. Immaterial wealth, by comparison, you can go on forever. And that's the beauty of it. So once you've got the material production mastered, and we've had that for about 100, maybe 200 years now, um, you should be focusing more on immaterial, not to reduce the material production. You should keep us comfortable. You should keep people housed and fed and, in a sense, independent. But now the focus should be directed towards immaterial wealth accumulation. Degrees, for example, educational degrees, skill sets, experiences, knowledge of some kind. All of these things don't require space. And in so doing, you can accumulate them forever, essentially. And that, well, not forever, for your lifetime, without limit. That is the ability to have unlimited growth without the negative consequences that come with unlimited material growth.
but okay, but humans, we're going to keep breeding, we're going to keep growing, and if sorry,
Not necessarily. I mean, you notice that the birth rate in the more developed countries tends to go down.
right? But the birth rate in Africa and the poor countries is very high. But those countries need to be poor for capitalism to stay profitable.
So in that sense, yes, that's what the system right now has.
Yeah,
but that can change. That should change.
I agree.
So, that's what she's basically saying. So the last paragraph for today, making war winnable is the purpose of the economic system we live in. Therefore, it stands to reason that money can always be found for war, that war will lead to economic growth, that war will increase economic productivity. The evidence for this, these truths, unquote, quote unquote, will continue for as long as the system of national accounts continues to preordain those results. So when we talked earlier about how the system leads to, the theory leads to the system, or to the policy that reinforces the system and the theory, that's what we have. People are going to continually point out that, hey, we're doing better off as a result of these wars and making these things and all this kind of stuff. We're safer and more secure as a result. And in a sense, they will be, because that's what the system necessitates. If we change the system, it wouldn't be the case. And when they first brought the system in, the debate in the US Congress was that we couldn't afford to pay for the war. Change the system of national accounts and suddenly the war becomes feasible. That's literally what can happen. So the system may continue as long as many people benefit from the economic opportunities of the war machine. And so many people will continue to believe that the best way to solve differences is through armed conflict. And here she does a back of the hand envelope calculation. To find the value of death in our system, the author roughly totaled up the amount of military spending from 1945 to 1986. Right? So this is from the end of the Second World War to the time she published this book. The Cold War, mostly during the Cold War, so this was mostly Russia and the United States and, of course, NATO. And what she found was that the amount of money that was spent to ensure that we could kill everyone on Earth, something like 500 times over, was about 700 million per person over a 40-year period.
Jesus Christ.
Okay.
Really?
Yes, $700 million per person to make sure that we could kill everybody. This is like the nuclear, and this is both conventional forces, the arms race, the conflict. All that money that was spent on anything even resembling, military expenditures, which I believe included the moonshot and all that kind of stuff, amounted to about $700 million per person over those 40 years. That is huge. That is the value of death in our system. And it's death by military, or not military, I could say, death by nuclear war or by a violent death. Death by homelessness, death by malnutrition, death by starvation or by exhaustion, or death by refugee or by exposure to the weather. That was valueless. No value in people dying that way. But if we can show that we can kill everybody on Earth 500 times over at any moment for those 40 years, it's going to cost $700 million per person. That's the value of that war. Now imagine, just to plant a seed, if we had spent that instead on justice, or education, or space exploration, or any sort of immaterial value, where would we be today? We'd be probably a lot better off. That's a hint of where things are going in the next section.
All right. I would argue that we could not have happened any other way. That had to happen in capitalism, regardless of the system of accounts. But we can leave that for next time.
Okay. So I guess 2 weeks, and sorry about Wednesday. I just.
Well, I forgot too last Wednesday. Oh, this Wednesday too.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I think we were supposed to do this last week.
Okay. Well, whenever I forgot that too then.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, we could do next week then to make up for it.
Let's do 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Jeff.
All right.
And, all right. Thanks everybody for. Do you see the comments in the section there?
I don't see anything, no. Oh, wait, hold on. Maybe I should click on my comments. Oh, hey, what do you know? They're there. Okay, I can take a look through these.
Yeah, there's mostly just people having arguments with chat, but. Anyway, I'm going to bring up that I have an interview with a Marxist economist next week, and I'm going to bring up Marylin Waring's point about immaterial production
being limitless, being possibly limitless.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up that point, and I'm also going to bring up the point about her main point really about a system of national accounts being the problem and not capitalism. And I suspect he's going to try to eviscerate that argument, but we'll see what you think. Sorry?
Let me know when you're on. I'll make some comments.
Okay, yeah, it's next Thursday sometime. I'll let you know. All right. Okay, bye now.
All right, thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.